I'll stay on the media for 1 second because it's, I think, super important. I'm, as you all know, a huge critic of how the media covered this campaign. But I also know that the New York Times is singular in America, in the world, really, because of the resources they have and the experience of their reporters. And I feel very torn. If I were Donald Trump's press secretary, I don't know that I'd give the New York Times a seat in the briefing room. In all honesty, I would say I'm going to give that seat to a podcaster who was fair to us, right? On the other hand, the New York Times is singular, and the New York Times, if it plays its traditional role, is one of the great guardians of the public interest. So it's going to be really interesting to see who gets seats, who gets called on, and then who gets interviews, who gets access, because vindictive White Houses of both parties, and make no mistake, the Biden communications operation was as vindictive as any I've ever heard of. They can say, well, you know what? Well, yeah, you can have a seat in the briefing room because we don't want to have that fight with the Correspondents Association. But maybe you're not getting all the email alerts about briefings. Maybe we're doing backgrounders from the Treasury Department and you're just not invited. Very easy to do that. And in some ways, it's vindictive and petty and it can be ideological. But I'll say again, for sake of sanity and human nature and fairness, why should these organizations that did their best for 4 years to keep Donald Trump from winning, why should they be given priority in their access to cover the White House? I ask that rhetorically because again, I think I guarantee you that the Trump administration 2.0 will do things that the Correspondents Association and some of these big news organizations will say, oh, how dare you? And again,
Oh,
how dare they? How dare
well,
they
and I think
cover
that part
cover
of
the
I
this.
think it's
election the way
not
they
an
covered it?
either or, right?
So
It has to be a both. And this is true when you ask me about where Democrats should go and who should they put forward. I really hope there's a lot less focus on Meet the Press and a lot more focus on how to win over
oh
Charlemagne God and his audience
yeah,
because
Yeah.
you're look.
she fell into that trap of you got to talk to the press, you got to give CNN an interview. And by the time they moved on to podcasters and everyone else, early voting had started.
I think that look, when I went into, we had it's interesting because there was this, here's how the setup works. Here's how you have to structure things. And to some extent we dealt with that, but there is going to, if you get the right people, and this is why who he chooses, not just for press secretary, but getting some people in there with experienced hands. What Mark just brought up, just for people to understand, the White House press office gave the seating chart over in 1984 and said, you guys, we don't want to deal with it anymore. Who sits where? You guys figure it out. They get to still issue passes. So the White House decides who gets a day pass, a weekly pass, and a hard pass. But where you sit and the locations on the lawn, that's up to the Correspondents Association because we don't want to deal with that headache. And the reality is, to your point, Mark, we had a lot of discussions about a lot of different things, and I had to make the decisions about which glass did I want to break? How much did I want to break? How much did I? Because it was me that was going to have to walk over it, right? And so there was a lot of people in the idea factory saying, kick this person, do this, do that. And I was like, you know what, guys? There are certain battles, like petty ones, like I said, who gets called on when I can deal with, but I'm not going to deal with reassigning every seat. And it was only because how many battles do you want to fight? Now, I agree with you. If I were them this time, I'd say, knowing what we know now, let's fight that battle. We're not going to kick you out of the briefing room because I don't believe that that's how government should operate. But you're certainly not sitting in the front row, and we're certainly not going to bend over backwards because I'd rather give, all of these other people, independent media folks. I mean, and
Yeah.
just one last quick thing that people understand. Corinne, my view as press secretary, if people wanted access to the briefing or whatever, I was an all of the above guy. I was like, if I give everybody access, I can't get in trouble, right? Because then I can say I just gave it to everybody. I think that Corinne Jean-Pierre took away all of the hard passes of people who weren't credentialed to Capitol Hill, which is a much harder credential to get because it has to do with your funding as a media organization. And that went way over the heads of most people because, again, no one really cares except the independent media that does. I think the Trump White House should restore that, give more access, not less. So anyway, that's
It's
my.
they're all super interesting, and we're all benefiting greatly from Sean's experience. I'm appreciative of that. I'm probably too late for me to clarify because people will clip off what I said earlier. I'm not advocating they pull the New York Times press credential or their seat in the briefing room. I'm saying I could understand why they would, and until the New York Times and other places acknowledged the flaws in their coverage. I could imagine the Trump White House doing that. And I think just as a matter of market share, forget the unfairness. Rogan got, I don't know what's up to 50 million, whatever it is. Like these places, the legacy places, they don't have the same audience. And from Ari Fleischer to Sean Spicer to everybody else who worked in the Trump White House, they know how ideologically biased these places are. Why would you put your ideological enemies who are not full-time guardians of the public interest? Why would you privilege them over places who have growing audiences and are not ideologically hostile? Now, it would be a huge mistake. And if you clip what I say today on social media or on a website, please include this part. I want guardians of the public interest in there. I don't want a bunch of toadies to Donald Trump asking all the questions. That would be horrible for the public. But what I would understand is if the Trump people said, these people have declining market share and they're hostile to us, why should they get to ask all the questions? I want people like me who are guardians of the public interest, regardless of the party, asking tough, fair questions. That's who should be credentialed. That's who should be given access. That should be called on primarily. The partisans can get access to. I hope I'm clear.